Welcome. Today's discourse will be about the topic, should Kenya demand reparations from China? I know this is a topic that, as we speak, has gained massive currency in the United States and in other Western nations, where issues are being raised as to what extent can China be said to be complicit in the concealment of information insofar as the coronavirus is concerned, and therefore how can they be caused to compensate the affected nations that have experienced massive economic losses, not to forget the lost lives. So that this is a topic that we dare say has gained currency, and it's important if we discuss it in the context of our nation, Kenya. Let me start by saying that the Kenyan president has already given a position in terms of where Kenya stands, and he did clearly state that Kenya would not be a party to what would seem to be a superpower battle between the United States and China, and that we shall always retain those friends who are ready to engage with us constructively so as to ensure our economic development. But be it as it may, in view of the fact that this is the end thing, and it's a topic that is currently being fundamentally and strongly engaged in those nations, I want to state that it is important that we as Kenyans, and I dare say that our foreign policy experts, explore the avenues just in the event that in the end of the day it is found that indeed China is culpable, so that then we would be in a position to demand for damages, compensation, or more specifically reparations from this particular country. Now, I would start by saying that reparations are basically damages, or for that matter compensation, that a country is made to pay to the offended country for ills or for wrongs that have been done to this particular country, and which has had consequences, and these consequences may be reflected in terms of economic losses, it may be reflected in terms of deaths, in terms of damages. A classic example of reparations was clearly manifest after the First World War, when the losing nation, which is Germany, was committed to pay reparations to the winning allies, and we all know the consequences of that, in the sense that the reparations caused major economic strains on Germany, with the net consequence that the nation, or rather the people of Germany, fell in custody to the whims and caprices of the Nazi party, which ultimately led to the rise of Hitler as the leader of Germany, and the rest is history. Of course, in our today's context, I do believe that it's still too early to suggest or even to imagine that China will be a losing player in this battle of the superpowers. But then the questions that we shall then need to delve into are, amongst others, what is the law on reparations, especially from where we sit in Kenya? And I want to state that first and foremost, the Constitution of Kenya at Article 2.6 provides that insofar as Kenya is a signatory to international treaties and conventions, then those treaties and conventions shall then apply as the law in Kenya. And to that extent, we have those international treaties and conventions which will be critical when it comes to the aspect of reparations, and especially where we want such damages to be, realized through institution of civil suits against an offending nation, which could, in the end of the day, result into grant of damages, which can then be claimed from the offending country as compensation. So what are these, in some of these international treaties that we are talking of? I have in mind, let me start with our local laws. We have the Privileges and Immunities Act, Cap 179 of the laws of Kenya, which has basically domesticated the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. Now, what is important about this act and the convention that I mentioned is that it appreciates the principle of sovereign immunity. Sovereign immunity in the sense that there's the principle that a state, a country, and for that matter, a state cannot enjoys, there is that principle of parity amongst states, and it is such that one particular country, one particular state cannot therefore purport to institute, judicial action. You cannot have that jurisdiction to sue a partner state, because as it were, you are at parity, you are all equal, all nations are equal, and that's what also forms the basis of diplomatic relations amongst states. Yeah. So that principle of sovereignty of nations is also well captured in yet another convention, and that is the United Nations Convention on Jurisdictional Immunities of States and their properties. Yeah? Now, this again strongly addresses the principle of sovereignty of nations. Yeah? Except that, and that is important, in that particular convention, at Article 12 creates scenarios when that immunity can actually be varied and discarded. Yeah? And what are these scenarios? Yeah? There are those scenarios where, for example, it is said that the state engaged in what can be described as a commercial transaction, a private commercial transaction. Then in such instances, then the state cannot raise a flag on the basis of immunity. On the basis of sovereignty, so that then it can be granted immunity against judicial actions by the offended state. It is also important to note that the same Article 12 would also not protect the state in scenarios where it has been established that there are actions or omissions that have been committed by the offending state, and that those actions or omissions have occasioned damage to the offended states. Yeah? So that then it would seem that pursuant to Article 12 of that convention, it would then be possible that suits can be instituted against the offending nation so as to, secure damages and compensation by the offended states. Yeah. Of course, there is also the question of where exactly would those actions or omissions have occurred. Yeah. Because the position is that such actions and omissions by the offending state ought to have been committed or ought to have accrued within the offended state. Yeah. So you realize that a legal question would therefore arise in a scenario where, like in the case of the COVID virus, the alleged offense is said to have been committed somewhere in China, Wuhan. But what is realized in countries like Kenya is the consequence of the same. So that the question would be, would it therefore be possible to ascribe liability upon China on the basis of the consequences that have accrued back in Kenya, notwithstanding the fact that the purported act or omission was committed way back and far away in Wuhan, in China? Now that is a question for debate. Yeah. Again, the law, insofar as reparations are concerned in Kenya, would also be, can also be found from within precedents. Now, precedents are those decisions that have been made by the courts in Kenya insofar as, interpretation of the doctrine of sovereign immunity is concerned. And of course, the Kenyan courts have had occasion to address this issue, and I would, I think for this particular purpose, the best case in mind would be, the one of Unicorn versus the state of Ghana, where the Court of Appeal authoritatively gave a decision insofar as the doctrine of sovereign immunity is concerned. And what is important is that the court found and established that doctrine is not absolute, but then it is restrictive. Restrictive in the sense that there has to be a test, yeah, and the test is by asking, the court has to ask itself the question that when this particular country committed this particular offending action or omission, can it be said that the same was being committed as a governmental initiative, yeah, as a government policy? Or can it be said that the same was being done in the course of, a commercial transaction? Yeah? And the court's position was that if it is found for a fact that the same was being done as part of a governmental initiative, as part of propounding a government policy, then the doctrine would apply. Otherwise, it would not. Yeah. So that, ladies and gentlemen, I would therefore say that given the framework of our laws, and that is the big picture as enunciated in the Constitution, our own laws, particularly the one on article on the Act number 179, the Act of Parliament on Immunity, as well as the International Convention and Covenants to which Kenya is a a signatory and which forms part and parcel of international law, then the question that we need to ask is it therefore possible and tenable that Kenya can actually move, to institute that sort of a suit against China? Yeah. That is assuming that in the end of the day, evidence will be adduced and it shall have been confirmed that indeed in one way or another the nation of China was culpable in terms of failing to contain the virus timelessly so as to avoid the spread internationally that has had massive consequences. Like I've said, of course, it would be possible to institute that sort of a course in Kenya under the parameters that have been enunciated. Yeah. But of course, we'll also have to look into certain other circumstances. For example, one, what would be the consequence of such a move on the doctrine of, sovereign immunity, and given the fact that this is a principle of international law that has gained, international acceptance? Would it then not be, subjecting the country to a scenario where it would then be seen as an international pariah by moving against what would otherwise be seen as, international norms that have been accepted? Secondly, another option that I want to believe that would be available to us insofar as reparations are concerned, is the cancellation of Kenyan debt obligations to China. And that would call for example, amongst others, the waiving of interest payments to the nation of China, who we all know Kenya is massively indebted towards. But again, that would also come with its own issues. For example, what would be the effect of such waiver, especially on Kenyans standing, given the fact that our credit rating as a country would in fact be massively affected by the fact as to whether or not we are up to date insofar as the payment of our debts is concerned. So in the event that we would have that sort of, in the event that we take that sort of initiative, then I think questions will have to be addressed as to what would be the consequence of that in terms of, the effect on the shilling internationally, the effect on us as a country in terms of our international ratings. Yeah. Another step that we may also take, would be perhaps ensuring that we impose massive tariffs on imports that come from China, at least to the extent as would warrant, as would meet what will have been quantified as the actual loss accrued from the effect of the coronavirus. But then again, this would also have to beg questions like, to what extent would the imposition of such tariffs affect our economy as Kenya? Who actually would meet the burden of such tariffs? Yeah? Is it possible that you can do that when, in the actual sense, we know that it is our importers who actually pay, the tariffs, so that that cost will then be transferred to them. Yeah, I think that's one of the issues that will have to be critically assessed, so that we see if that sort of an option would even be viable. Yeah. Finally, and that is more critical, I would think that the question of reparations against China is one that probably Kenya cannot address standing, in an island by itself, but it's something which has to be taken as, a group position by the entire African continent, that I know in one way or another is indebted to China by virtue of the loans that the country has, favored this country with, based on the massive infrastructure projects that China has in Africa. But that the same will also have to be weighed vis-a-vis the consequences of the coronavirus, which has, terribly impacted negatively on the economies of African nations. So that I honestly believe that the African nations, through the banner of the African Union, would then be the right body that would come with a united front, maybe along the lines of asking for, a cut on the debt obligations, asking for interest waivers. Yeah. And I think that from that perspective of numbers, of, from a united African Union, then it would be possible for the African countries to negotiate strongly and favorably with the Chinese government, so that, these economies would then find a way through which they can at least be fairly compensated for the consequences, which, like you are saying, we are not so sure, but definitely from the signs we can see are as a result of, gross negligence by particular countries insofar as the management of the source of this particular virus is concerned. In summation and in conclusion, I want to state that, of course, it is possible that legal action can be taken against the state of China if it is found to have been culpable. Of course, such legal action may face some, technical hurdles on the basis of sovereignty, on the basis of, as to if the cause, the act, the omissions were committed in China, and if the mere fact that only the consequences were felt in Kenya, would that, as it were, be enough to ascribe damages upon the offending state? Yeah. I think those are technical issues that can then be appropriately advanced through legal actions, and our courts would then be in a position to analyze and come up with a proper position. However, I do honestly believe that the best way forward, given the fact that as a nation we owe a lot to China in terms of the fact that we are heavily indebted to them, and that position reflects throughout Africa, then the best option would be for the African Union to come up with a position and that this position be then presented upon China for consideration. Thank you.